What's good, homies? Welcome back to the Drafts and Draughts podcast. I'm Joe, aka Sultan. No Dave yet again. It's Monday, December 2nd, and we have 1 week remaining in the fantasy regular season before the reason we all play, the fantasy football playoffs. The Monday Night Football game's on in the background, but once this is over, we'll be heading into week 14, which means most all of your trade deadlines should be complete. I know. Shouldn't I be watching? I'm sorry, but I just find the Browns and Broncos to be two of the most uninteresting teams to watch in the league with a collective, 1.5 fantasy relevant assets across both teams. But thank God for Jameis Winston. He's by far the most entertaining player, I think, in the entire league. Him or Keon Coleman have to be the top two. Shout out Florida State for producing the most compelling animated characters in the league. But no draft review today. Thanksgiving absolutely destroyed me. I gained 8 pounds this week. I had leftover Thanksgiving turkey, mac and cheese, mashed potatoes, trifle cake, all that, just way too much constantly in my fridge. I'm so glad to have gotten through it all. And with that being said, though, I'm definitely going to try to get back on the wagon, have a nice clean week, get to the gym. But let's go on to the OTQ. And I think it's relevant for this discussion. The one tough question this week is, should dynasty leagues have a trade deadline? And if so, when is it optimal? I've heard a number of different sources or podcasts or content creators talk about how dynasty leagues should never have a trade deadline. Teams should be able to exploit playoff teams having needs during the playoffs and should be able to sell pieces in week 17 to try to... No, to me, absolutely fucking not. That is a complete baloney bullshit. You don't see the Chiefs making a trade in February to go get another wide receiver to try to win a ship. They're not trading for Devontae Adams after the Jets get eliminated, which RIP, they're already eliminated. But so to me, when's it optimal? I mean, I guess the only way I would ever be okay with a no trade deadline would be only for non-playoff teams. So if you're still in playoffs, you can't make trades. If you've been eliminated, then sure. If you want to keep a no trade deadline and keep trades open year round for non-playoff teams, by all means, unless your consolation bracket matters. Like both of my home leagues, the consolation bracket matters. That'll never be a thing. But when is it optimal? I'm in multiple leagues. I have one league that's open till week 14. My one quarterback PDFDL league that I do with Dave. The trade deadline is actually tonight. It should be closing around the end of this game, so around like 11 o'clock Eastern. My home Superflex league, it was week 12. I personally think week 12 is the perfect window. I think week 11 is too early in the season. There's still too much time between week 11 and the start of playoffs for injuries to happen, for bye weeks to occur, where you could still reshape your team, but it's not so close to playoffs where teams are buying their way to a ship, which I think it's bullshit. I would be so livid if all season I was in first place. I built a great team. I didn't need to pay extra for extra assets. I built a sound team. I invested in the proper depth pieces so that I could withstand injuries in the playoffs, only to get square off against a guy in the finals who goes, man, I might as well just buy a champion. Let's send off a second for Henry and a second for whatever to the guys who are eliminated to go put together a championship caliber team, especially like if your leagues are anything like mine. I know that some people will do anything to spite other managers. I could see that being such a gray area where people are renting players the last week of playoffs. So absolutely, I would never be a part of a league that didn't have a trade deadline, and I would leave any of my leagues that tried to implement that. But yeah, so let's talk about the guts of the episode today. We're going to be going through some trade reviews. I'm going to try to keep it quick. This isn't going to be a long drawn out episode. I got about 15 to 20 of my own trades across my leagues to walk through. The purpose here is to give some ideas for some trades using concrete examples. It's one thing for me or Dave or your second favorite podcast to mention trades coupled with trade values. Say, oh, go send off a second and go get Cortland Sutton. It's another for to actually see trades that have been executed in real leagues with real people, not portfolio leagues, not expert leagues, not hypothetical trade values. It's important to see how these trades get executed. And I think one of the most important things to remember here is that not all of these trades are made in a vacuum. So that while some of those third-party services like Keep Trade Cut can be useful in discerning trade value and pointing out, hey, this player should be worth a second and this player should be worth a first, it shouldn't be the end-all be-all, because at the end of the day, you should be trying to inch your team closer to your goal. And that should be what dictates a good trade or a bad trade for your team. So just because Calvin Ridley or Devontae Adams or Keenan Allen should be worth a second, if I'm on the verge of securing the 101 or 102 and shedding some points in the form of getting rid of Calvin Ridley would potentially secure me the 101, then settling for a couple thirds for him should be something I should be considering doing. Luckily for the trades today, I will know almost all of the team's constructs and the league dynamics. So it should be really easy for me to comment on the directions of the teams and kind of paint the picture for possibly what each manager was thinking. But most importantly, I'm hoping some of these trades inspire some moves for those of you who don't or haven't yet had your trade deadline, or maybe even just to be creative in the offseason to be like, hey, these are some cool trades that some people did at the end of the season. I should keep that in mind during the offseason and potentially going into next year as I try to execute some trades. So that being said, let's jump into some of the trades. So let me present. So ironically, this, and I do have timestamps on here. They're a little outdated. I took these screenshots like a week ago. So this trade, first trade on the screen here, is one manager received Cortland Sutton and the other manager received a 2027 second round pick. This is the following trades are all one quarterback start 8 full PPR dynasty leagues where we are going to tight end premium next year. It's a 12-team league. And we will be going to 1.5 tight end premium next year. So again, repeating the trade is this team received Cortland Sutton in exchange for a 2027 second round pick. Now the team Nick Printy and Printy at the top there, it's important to note that this team has gone through the ringer in terms of injuries. Earlier this year, they suffered injuries to Isaiah Pacheco, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, Rashid Shaheed, Christian Kirk. They basically lost every single startable asset on their team. And over the course of a 2-week span, they ended up replenishing a lot of their assets. And this is one of the last trades they made, which was sending off an arbitrary future second for Cortland Sutton. Now, this was in the middle of Sutton's tremendous tear he's been on. So he had already put together a couple good games in a row. And I think what's in the other team on the giving end of Cortland Sutton, T-Bone Steak, the team's 3-7 right now. They are 3-8. They were at the time, 2-6 or something like that. They were clearly out of playoffs. They had lost Christian McCaffrey. Their team was underperforming across the board. To me, this was a good trade for both sides. What it did was it solidified the N Printy team. McGiblets gave them a chance to make a run at playoffs, and they're now 8-4, soon to be 9-4, and potentially in the driver's seat for a first round bye. So this was one of the trades that I think propelled them forward. Granted, they made some other trades, and trading him for a second, while it seems a little low, if I'm T-Bone, this is perfectly acceptable. I'm trading away a 29-year-old receiver who's putting up the best season of his career. I think it might be in the final year of his contract. If not, he's only got one more year after this. It's not necessarily a player I think I would see myself building around. And while maybe he could have gotten more if he really shopped him, I think you're starting to see, especially if you've had a dynasty league around for a while, you're seeing the bifurcation between the competitors, the contenders, and the pretenders, to where most of the contenders have solidified rosters, to where Cortland Sutton isn't starting for any of the contenders. Or if he is, he's not giving them marginal benefit at receiver that they don't already have in the form of T. Higgins or Jackson Smith and Jigba or Terry McLaurin or Cooper Kupp. Like, there's plenty of other alternatives on all these teams where Sutton isn't really an upgrade for any of the contenders. So his options for selling Sutton were pretty limited. So I'd say this is, I'd give this trade a B plus for T-Bone and a B plus for Printy. I think it's a good trade for both sides. So let's move on to the next trade here. This trade took place a week before that, also involving N Printy. He traded away the aforementioned injured Brandon Ayuk, Isaiah Pacheco, and Rashid Shaheed to the 0 and whatever it was at the time, 0 and 8 PME Warrior, or the Smithfield Shiny Shuckles, in order to receive Patrick Mahomes, Deebo Samuel, and Rashad Bateman. So this was kind of going back to all the injuries that this team suffered. This was the catalyst that put the McGiblets back in the driver's seat to be a real contender. I think at the time they might have been 4-4 or 5-4, and this is the type of trade that, after they lost Dak Prescott as well. So this was the trade that really pushed them into the driver's seat towards making a run in playoffs. And again, for the Shuckles, great haul on their part. They're 0-8 at the time. I think they're 0-13 now. Just lost by 0.2 points this week, which is a heartbreaking loss. They're going on 28, 29 straight losses. But again, what an incredible haul. I would say, based on the injuries, Deebo is probably about equal to Brandon Ayuk right now. Ayuk's like 3 or 4 years younger, but obviously has an ACL injury. Patrick Mahomes is probably not worth as much as Isaiah Pacheco, and Rashid Shaheed is definitely worth more than Rashad Bateman. So I think PME Warrior actually took down the most value here, but clearly gave up the most current year points. And this is the type of deals. These are the type of deals that make me smile, because it's like you clearly see the motivations of both of these teams, where one team is a fringe contender without their own first round pick. So they needed to, and Printy didn't have their own pick, the McGiblets. So it was the type of move that you need to make. You can't rest your laurels and say, well, if I don't make playoffs, at least I can compete for the 101. They don't have that option. So they had to make a move where they forewent some value in the form of Ayuk, Pacheco, and Shaheed all being about 25, 26 years old. But they got two really strong contending pieces in Rashad Bateman. And Bateman isn't a slouch. He's a bye-week flex on a contend. I don't know. He's too inconsistent for my liking on a contender. I think he has a place in the league. I think he's a great, you suffer a bunch of injuries and have an unfortunate concurrent buys, then yeah, Bateman's a good guy to plug in. He's not somebody I'd ever want to depend on. So again, I give this trade an A for PME Warrior. I give it, again, a B plus for N Printy. I think he lost some value, but he got the points he needed to stay competitive. And Mahomes has also been on a tear since the McGiblets acquired him. So I can't really fault them for anything in this trade. Next trade here, also involving N Printy. This was another trade that happened simultaneously as the Mahomes trade, is they traded away Saquon Barkley, who is arguably their best player, was their best player, and is probably the fantasy MVP and the NFL MVP this season. But he received in return Tyrone Tracy, rookie running back for the Giants, a 2026 first and a 2025 second, which that 25 second appears to be in the lottery right now. So I think that's a good pick to acquire, because it's going to be a top 6 pick in the second round, or a top 18 pick overall. I think it gives him a very good chance to recoup some youth on a team that, as I mentioned, was barren with injuries and age, with all of his players getting up there in age. And not to mention, getting a 2026 first is nothing to sneeze at, along with Tyrone Tracy, who has come onto the scene as a young-ish piece. I mean, he is going to be a 25-year-old rookie running back, which is definitely not the type of running back I'd be investing in as a youth piece. It's funny that by the time Jonathan Brooks's rookie contract is over, he will be still younger than Tyrone Tracy is today. And that's crazy to me. But this was a good trade. It was a tear down off Barkley. Would I have liked to see him keep Barkley and commit to this competitive team? Yes. But I think if your motivation is to stay competitive, but also diversify some of your assets instead of having all your value in one big piece in Barkley, I think he succeeded in doing that. Now, he traded the Saquon Barkley piece to Sal Scapp in the Angry Beavers of Pocho, which are currently 11-2 and the number one team in the league, my biggest contender in the league. And I say to them, well done. You traded away an unknown, unsecure running back asset and 2 unknown picks for the best player in fantasy. You nailed it. They filled the only hole they really have on their team, which is they don't have any crazy, super high upside player. Jordan Mason had been that guy for them early on. They do have Tyreek Hill. They do have Brian Thomas Jr. They do have Travis Kelce. But this was the stable prime of career asset that they needed to put their stamp on the season and say, I'm ready to contend and be a true championship caliber contender this year. So I give it an A minus for Sal Scap. I don't think it was an absolute fleece job. They did give up quite a bit of their capital, but I think consolidating in such a shallow lineup league like we have, we only start 8 skill positions and a kicker and a defense. It's worth it to consolidate your assets like this. You're praying you get a fraction of Saquon's productivity out of a 26 first and 25 second, and your competitive window is now go get that guy that makes you an absolute juggernaut champion now. So I give it a B for N-Printy, a B minus for N-Printy, given the other moves, and an A minus for Sal Scap. All right. This is a funny one. Next trade we have here, still in the one quarterback, is D's Astro. My co-host Dave traded away a 2025 second round pick. It's going to be a playoff second, so a late second for Deontay Johnson while he was still on the Panthers. And this happened probably about 6 weeks ago. And he was seemingly establishing some chemistry with Andy Dalton. And at the time, it was, Dave's team, the Bentonville Bored Apes, was really just one solid flex player away from making some noise in the playoffs. They had 2 good running backs in Henry and Eckler, and Tank Bigsby had come on as that bye week flex or that injury flex. And they had great receivers in McLaurin, Dell, Pickens. Really just needed another flex since you can flex 2 wide receivers. And this seemed like the last piece of the puzzle. Of course, he had other assets on his team like Brandon Cooks and Xavier Liga and other guys that I think can be flexible and have upside. But this was the guy that was supposed to be the stable piece. And man, it just hasn't worked out. Ever since the Ravens traded for him, Deontay Johnson's coming off the last 3 weeks where he's played like 4, 5, and 0 snaps on offense. I don't know what's going on with him. The trade has just fallen completely through. And, bravo to T-Bone Steak, again, trading away one of his less attractive wide receiver assets for a second. Like, really, really good job. It gives him a lot of flexibility with those picks to go fill out his team accordingly, whether it's actually through the draft making those picks or by leveraging those picks in some sort of tier up trade or combining picks to move around the draft. I think it's a really good job, especially since he's clearly a rebuilding team, to just keep acquiring these liquid assets that, remember, when you get a pick, you don't have to make all the picks. And in fact, I discourage you guys from making all of your picks. Doesn't mean I'm right. I just think it's I personally think the best attitude to take with your picks is to use them to move around the board and target guys in tiers that you like, and then ship the rest off for known assets at the right value, especially during your draft when picks are worth the most. So again, knowing what I know now, I give T-Bone, an A for this, and I give Desastro a C minus for this trade, unfortunately. Especially because he has no 2025 picks now at all he has no 2025 first or seconds at all. So losing out on one of his second round picks is going to be kind of huge for his efforts, especially if he ends up missing playoffs. Next trade. This is actually the trade how PME Warrior acquired Patrick Mahomes in the first place. So this trade happened 2 months ago, which would have been about 10 weeks ago now, which I say puts us right around week 4. Week 5, maybe. PME Warrior traded away his own 2026 first, another team's 2026 first, actually the manager he's trading to, a 26 seconds, a 25 third, and a 25 fourth to receive Patrick Mahomes, Deebo Samuel, and Kyle Pitts. Now, keep in mind, this is a 1 quarterback league. So giving up 2 firsts and 2 seconds for Mahomes, Debo, and Pitts. Oof. I mean, at this point, Kyle Pitts. I mean, I don't think you're getting him for a second anywhere. But I mean, I don't think anybody's paying a first straight up for him. And with Mahomes, I think same thing. I don't think you're getting him for a second or even 2 seconds. But I'd have a hard time seeing anyone paying a first for him at this point either. Same with Debo. All these guys feel like fringe, barely worth a first. Maybe at the end of the day, call them all worth 6 or 7 seconds combined, or 1 first and 3 seconds. Like it's just. It feels like he paid 1 extra first too much for guys that, I mean, keep in mind, PME Warrior was 0-4, clearly going to be a bottom feeder team. And to pay for 2 29-year-olds in Kyle Pitts, I think Kyle Pitts was a savvy buy if you got him for the right price, but not for the price of 2 26 firsts. Like, it's just, man, it's not the trade I'm looking for. And inversely, Max Goldfarb, the Murray Hill Kangaroos. I mean, God bless them. They started their teardown around about week 4, week 5, to pick up this much capital for players who are clearly not part of your future, except for maybe Kyle Pitts. But at the same time, if that's the piece that was required to get this deal done, I mean, I tip my cap to them to get 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and an early third and a fourth for Mahomes, Debo, and Pitts. I think that's a fantastic deal on his part, especially given the direction that you're taking their team. They've now amassed 5 2025 firsts and 4 2026 firsts. They're putting themselves in a position to be a very, very strong contender as soon as 2026 if they start moving some of those picks, but definitely in 2027 or 2028. I know it sounds so funny to talk about now, but so I give the trade a B for Max Goldfarb and the Kangaroos, and I give it a C for PME Warrior. I mean, granted, he ended up leveraging those picks to make a better trade where he gained value, but he certainly lost a fuck ton of value in this trade. All right, moving on to the next trade here. Also happened 2 months ago, also involving Max Goldfarb and the Kangaroos. We have M. Gilday and the North Carolina Sasquatch acquired Chris Olave and Devin Singletary in exchange for 2 2026 firsts and a 2026 second. So again, this was a series of trades that all went down in a flurry at around about week 4, 5, or 6. Obviously, in hindsight, seeing that Chris Olave has gone on IR and might not play again this season, and his career is in jeopardy, and now Devin Singletary has been usurped by Tyrone Tracy, the trade looks awful. But at the time, I feel like Olave was a top 12, 15 wide receiver, dynasty wide receiver, and those wide receivers cost 2 firsts. And when they're 25 or under and you're that good, you're not getting them for a single first. That's 100% not going to happen. You're never going to get a young, productive, valuable receiver for 1 single first, essentially a re-roll of a pick that you hope turns into Chris Olave. That's a 50% chance. So in order for it to actually be worth it, you got to give up 2. So this was a sound trade at the time. Obviously, given what's happened, it looks a little worse. Granted, they're all in 2026, so he's got time to recoup some of that value. And if Olave comes back for the fantasy playoffs, it could end up being the difference maker for the Sasquatch championship run. But it's not looking good for them. And again, Max Goldfarb and the Kangaroos getting 2 26 first and a 26 second makes this trade a smash for them. I mean, I have to give them an A for it, and I have to give the Sasquatch a C+ because it was the right trade at the time. It hasn't unfolded accordingly, and I don't want to grade trades purely based on a results-driven analysis because I don't think that's the right way to look at it. So maybe I'll give them a B- for that because I think it was the right process. I think they were one of the most competitive teams in our league, and at the time, it was a move to give them the best chance to win. It just unfortunately hasn't worked out. Next trade, it's PME Warrior, the Smithfield Shiny Shuckles, again, the 0-4 at the time trade, acquired Jalen Waddle for a 26 first, a 26 second, and Ray McLeod. And this first and second were the first and second that M. Gilday used in the other trade to go get Olave. So it was kind of a series of back-to-back trades where Gilday and the Sasquatch acquired a 26 first and second, and flipped them with another first to go get Olave, essentially trading Waddle and a first for Olave at the time, which now also sounds awful now that I say that out loud. But again, this is one of those trades that I don't think made sense for the Shuckles at the time. Why are we trading away picks mid-season when they're at their least valuable for a guy like Jalen Waddle, who is struggling, but also scoring points? So essentially could have been his most valuable, kind of, because it's in season, he's scoring. I don't know. I'm not trying to shit talk the Shuckles and PME Warrior, but I didn't quite. I was scratching my head a little bit at the trade at the time. A lot of the trades they've made. But again, I think Waddle is a superstar. I think he was a fantastic prospect, and I do like the idea of getting him on the cheap because, like I said before, young, productive superstar wide receivers like Chris Olave and Jalen Waddle should cost 2 firsts, and to get him for less than that, a first, a second, and Ray McLeod, that at the time also seemed like a good trade. And inversely, because Gilday ended up leveraging those picks in a future trade, hard to say it was a super sell low. I think overall, I give both sides C pluses on this. I think PME Warrior, the timing didn't make sense. M Gilday, the value was a little bit less than maybe you really want for a guy like Waddle. But I understand him being fed up with all of Waddle's injuries. So C pluses for both sides on that. Next trade is your boy, the Sultan, acquired Bijan Robinson in a 2026 second for Dalton Kincaid and 2 2025 firsts. So there's some layers to this. This is an intra-division trade. So me and Max are in the same division. The Worcester Wyverns acquired Bijan Robinson to basically put the last puzzle piece into their Infinity Gauntlet. They were one RB1 away from putting together a very dominant team, and I think this was the piece. And I think at the time, this is after week 4, so Bijan had put up 4 straight games of around 10 to 15 points, and Dalton Kincaid had come off, was also kind of underperforming. Let me look up their stats right now real quick, because that was part of the logic. Was I felt like what was going through my head was, I know Bijan was arguably the best running back prospect we've ever seen, at least as long as I've been playing Dynasty, and was constantly described as rivaling Saquon Barkley. And it just felt like a matter of time before he exploded. It felt like his usage was weird. He's splitting carries with Tyler Algier. Yeah, he had put up points scored of 16, 16, 13, 11 before we traded for him. And Dalton Kincaid had gone 2, 7, 13, 10. So he was on a mini on the come up. And I think everyone regarded him as a top 5, 6 dynasty tight end at the time. And the key here is this was the catalyst that started the Kangaroos teardown. So they received 2 2025 firsts to go on top to compare with the 2025 firsts they already owned. They already owned 3 at the time. So this gave them 5 of the 12 2025 firsts. Now, both of those 2025 firsts were 3-1 teams at the time. And they're currently the number 1 and number 2 teams in the league, being 11-2 and 10-3, making them most definitely playoff first, and could end up being the 110 and 112. So seeing this deal now, weeks later, after Bijan's gone on this tear of 25-point games, man, this is a smash trade for Salt, especially the Wyverns getting a 26 second added on top. I think you can make the case now with the way Kincaid's played on top of injury. He's probably worth a second now instead of a first, like he was worth at the time. So Bijan for 2 late firsts is an absolute smash. I mean, we obviously didn't know where those picks were going to end up. It was a speculative play on his part. We all thought Kincaid was going to be good. He just hasn't locked it in yet. Doesn't mean he can't be, but again, for the goals of the Kangaroos, I don't hate it for them because they end up building out their draft pick arsenal that they have now. And so I'll give the trade an A for the Wyverns and a B plus for the Kangaroos, because I have to give it a B minus for the Kangaroos. I think they could have got more for Bijan now, obviously, than they could have gotten for him back in week 4. And he almost seems like the type of guy you probably just want to build around, regardless of your team construct, unless you're getting some ungodly haul that includes the 101 or the 102 or at least the top 6 first to build around with. So that's my analysis of that trade. That's all for my one quarterback trades. I want to take us through some Superflex trades if you guys want, if you have time. So this league is my home. Let me stop sharing this screen. So this league is a 12-team start 9 skill position players and a defense Superflex league where it's a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, and a Superflex and a defense. It's a half PPR with a half point tight end premium. And so it's obviously going to be a different mindset in Superflex leagues where one, picks are worth a lot more because there's more valuable positions to pick from. Quarterbacks tend to go in if not the first 6 picks, definitely the first round, which pushes down a lot of valuable assets to that early to mid second round as well, making all of your draft picks worth that much more. So let's talk about the first trade here. Let me go to I'm going to do this in reverse order this time, where we start from the oldest trades and work our way up. So this first trade here is, again, PME Warriors in both leagues. PME Warrior traded away Travis Kelce. This is 2 months ago, so about 10 weeks ago from the time I took the screenshot. So maybe about week 5. Traded away Travis Kelce and received Dallas Goedert in a 2027 fourth. And if you recall, through the first 4 weeks of the season, Dallas Goedert was the tight end 1 overall, and he's 5 years younger than Travis Kelce, or 4 years younger than Kelce. And Team Berkeley's 88, who also at the time had Trey McBride and Cade Otton, felt like, in my head, I'm thinking they probably just saw themselves as getting a decent deal on a perennial stud first round pick. And if it didn't work out, they had other tight ends to bank on. And I think PME Warrior was saying, I need somebody to produce now, because they did have Brock Bowers, but I don't think Brock Bowers got out to a blazing start, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. In hindsight, this trade is not very good. Obviously, Kelce has exploded in return to form, whereas Dallas Goedert has been subpar since then. But it's important to note that the trade didn't really set PME Warrior back. They're currently 10-3 and are in line to get a bye. If they win next week, they definitely get a bye in the 1 seed. If they lose next week, it's murky. But the trade hasn't hurt them. I do think it looks like an L now. And at the time, I think it was a creative way to try to get a little bit younger with Kelce to go to Goddard. And at the time, he was tight end 1, so I can't really fault him. I'm going to give PME Warrior and the Agrabah Forces of Nature a C+ on this trade, and I'm going to give Berkeley's 88 and the Skull Island Kongs a A- on this trade, because I think it ended up being a really, really savvy deal for the Kongs. Next trade I have here was also about 2 months ago. Myself, the Sultan, the Kanto Krakens in this league. I traded away Kyle Pitts and 2/3 to get back 2 seconds and a fourth. Sounds awful, but I was fed up with Kyle Pitts. I had Tucker Kraft at the time, who was coming on, and I had Zach Ertz, who has been a known commodity in fantasy circles for a decade. And I felt like, why am I bothering trying to, chase the dragon with Kyle Pitts? I'm better off at this point, unless I can get that top tight end like Bowers and McBride. I'm better off just streaming whatever tight end. I think they're all touchdown dependent random guys anyways. I'm cool with Kraft occasionally giving me zeros, but more often than not giving me 10 to 13 points than Kyle Pitts, who might give me 25 once a year, but then give me at least 5 games that are at 0 to 2 points. So I was fed up. I was coming off a 0 with Kyle Pitts and a loss. And I told everyone in the league, I am trading him no matter what. And then as soon as I trade him, he went on a 4-game tear where he scored double digits every single week. And I looked like the biggest bozo. Or if anything, I personally single-handedly saved Kyle Pitts' career. But also over the last 4 weeks since then, he's gone on to put up multiple games with less than 3 points. So at the end of the day, I feel really glad that I recouped some draft capital for Pitts. I'm stoked to have 2 seconds in the chamber now. Getting 26th fourth is no joke either. In Superflex, there's a lot. Tyrone Tracy was a fourth. Braylon Allen was a fourth. Theo Johnson was a fourth. I'm plenty okay with this deal, regardless of how it ended up shaping out with Kyle Pitts. And I'm just done with him. He's getting alphaed by Darnell Mooney, so I can't take it seriously anymore that Kyle Pitts is an alpha tight end. So at the end of the day, I give the Sultan a B- in the trade, and I give PME Warrior and the Forces of Nature a B on the trade. I don't think they really made a profit on it. I think I probably sold short a little bit, but I'm okay with it. It got me towards what I wanted, which was one less headache to think about every week in the form of starting Kyle Pitts or not. Next trade here also happened about 10 weeks ago. Small trade, but I thought it was a little creative. C. Burnett 26 traded away Austin Eckler for Jaleel McLaughlin to Hercules 88. C. Burnett 26, the West Dillon Giraffes manager, complete tank mode, completely just gutting his team, got rid of a pretty good running back asset this year in Austin Eckler to Hercules 88 in the Skull Island Kongs, one of the more competitive teams, for a young running back in Jaleel McLaughlin, who we've highlighted in other episodes as being an efficiency beast out of the backfield, a pass catching back with some seemingly good efficiency chops, the ability to break tackles. And if he were to ever receive a larger role in that offense, he could be a fantasy superstar, or at least a reliable fantasy player. I think it was a good calculated trade by the Giraffes. Could they have asked for more for Eckler? Of course, they probably, if they held out longer, they could have gotten more. But also, Eckler could have gone to, if this concussion that Eckler has right now happened in week 7, you're not getting anything for Eckler the rest of the season. So I think it was a good trade about by both sides. I give it a B for both sides. Jaleel McLaughlin hasn't really worked out yet, but I think it was the right process. So I can't really criticize him too much. And I think, Eckler has helped out Hercules 88 with, CMC being out for a while and JT dealing with injuries. Eckler's probably been in that lineup more than he wanted to have him in there. So I'm going to give him credit for its due. It's been a pretty decent trade for both sides. Next trade here happened in around week 5, where PME Warrior and the Forces of Nature traded away a 2026 first to Sleepy Greg and the Beantown Patriots for Aaron Jones. Now, Aaron Jones was playing well, but damn, that's a lot to give up for a 29-year-old running back. I'm sorry. I don't care how good you're playing. I'm not paying a first for a 29 or 30-year-old running back. Not Kamara, not Henry, not Eckler, none of them. Granted, I'm okay with being wrong about not spending the first on those guys that I could have gotten the points, because I think if my process would always say, when in doubt, don't make that deal. You're going to be right way more often than you're wrong. So has the Jones trade worked out? Hard to say it hasn't, because the team's gone on to go, 10-3. But I mean, I just don't like the trade in terms of value. But sometimes when you're stuck with a shady backfield, you gotta find that guy who's willing to make a trade. And this is the one that he went with. And I give props to Sleepy Greg. He ended up tearing his team down a little sooner probably than he wanted to, especially not having his own 2025 first. But they're a 2-11 team now. They were probably 2-4 at the time. This was the trade, one of the trades they had to make, and it was one of the first trades towards building towards a better future. I don't hate it on obviously don't hate on their part. I give an A- to Sleepy Greg and the Beantown Patriots, and I give a C+ to PME Warrior and the Forces of Nature. Here's a cool trade. This happened a month ago, as of a couple weeks ago. So it was by week 7 or 8 when this trade happened. And it was boom, boom, boom. And the Arrakis Worm Boys traded away Justin Herbert, their 27 first and their 26 second, for Jalen Hurts, a 27 third, and Raheem Mostert. And this was probably the biggest trade of our season so far. Rarely do you see superstar quarterbacks get traded in our league. I think I can only think of one other one where there was a CJ Stroud for Kyler Murray trade, and then there was a CJ Stroud for Josh Allen trade. And that's it for the last 3 years. Yeah, there's been smaller trades involving Bryce Young, involving Jared Goff, involving Daniel Jones, but no trade on this scale has been made yet. And to see 2 first-round picks in our startup draft get traded like this, it's huge. And I think, again, C. Burnett and the East Dillon Giraffes are a complete tank job, and the Arrakis Worm Boys are 10-3, or about to be 10-3, fighting for a first-round bye. And I think a lot of it they can give credit to is how good Jalen Hurts has played over the last month. Has Justin Herbert turned it on? Does it look like they maybe paid too much and overpaid for Hurts? Of course. Does Mostert look washed? Yes. But did it set them up and give them a chance to be where they are right now? Also, yes. And a 2027 first is so far away that it almost feels like it doesn't exist. So I'm going to give the Worm Boys a B+, and I'm going to give the Giraffes a B. Mostly because they're also Eagles fans, so it's weird that they're willing to part with Hurts at market value, basically, at the time, and not demand another first. I guess getting an elite quarterback plus a first, we know Herbert has the talent. He has had a 22-plus point per game season in his past. We're just waiting for Harbaugh to unlock it. I got to give him credit. Pretty solid, savvy move on his part to part with one of his hometown favorites. Another big trade that happened earlier this year, and this one's a lot to digest. So, happening about 5-6 weeks ago, right before CeeDee Lamb's 41-point game. So, whatever week that was, Sleepy Greg traded away CeeDee Lamb, Chase Brown pre-breakout, Kareem Hunt, and his 2025 third for Berkeley's and the Skull Island Kongs 26 first, 25 second, Isaiah Pacheco, Jameson Williams, and Cole Kmet. So this is a colossal trade with a lot of pieces, and gave up last season's wide receiver 1 overall. At the time, it was basically CeeDee Lamb straight up for all of these pieces, and it looked like a smash trade for both sides. But now that Chase Brown has come on as this 20-plus point per game guy, it just looks like a complete smash for the Berkeley's 88 and Skull Island Kong side. This team is just took down the forces of nature. They're most likely going to secure themselves a back-end playoff spot now, and it's all credit to this trade. Without getting Brown and Lamb, I don't think this team makes the push that they do. They're a very boom-bust team, and I think it was a great deal on their part. And like we mentioned earlier with Sleepy Greg and the Patriots, after trading away Aaron Jones for a first, it was the catalyst towards their rebuild. And I think getting Pacheco and JMO with a first and second on top, yeah, it sucks to part with Lamb, but they got 4 or 5 pieces here to build around. And now they have 3 2026 firsts. Puts them in a position to really navigate that 26 draft and or trade those picks ahead of time to fill out a roster for next year's season. Savvy trade on both sides. I give the Skull Island Kongs, I give them an A. And I give Sleepy Greg, I give them a B+. I think it was ended up being a good trade for both sides. I'll give them a B. I think they could have done better for Lamb if they broke Lamb and Chase Brown up. But who knew Chase Brown was going to turn into the guy he's turned into? Next trade, it's a smaller trade, but I thought it was creative. This happened also about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it was right before Amari Cooper got traded. Fanman traded away Wan'Dale Robinson. Well, Fanman was the Scrooge McDucks. Duckburg Scrooge McDucks traded away Wan'Dale Robinson to Ben Horsfall and the South Park Centaurs for Jerry Jeudy and a fourth. And that trade has been like Jerry Jeudy has resurrected his career. Amari Cooper got traded weeks later and has emerged as the number 1 option for Jameis Winston. Well, I guess besides maybe David Njoku. I don't know who's the leading target share getter, but Jerry Jeudy's been a strong fantasy producer, regardless of how often he body catches. And Wan'Dale Robinson, despite being a screen PPR merchant, has been a reliable flex option this year. So I thought it was a creative trade by both teams. I think it's helpful, obviously, now for the Scrooge McDucks to have a guy that I think is a reliable wide receiver 3, or if not, at least definitely a reliable flex option. So just a small trade I wanted to highlight. I give good trade on both sides. I give a B+ to the McDucks and a B- to the Centaurs. Next trade here is PME Warrior and the Forces of Nature acquired Kareem Hunt for a 26 third and 27 third. This trade happened a while ago. Kareem Hunt's worth nothing now with Pacheco back. But at the time, it gave the forces of nature yet another player to plug into their RB2 slot when they were going through this RB carousel. Where, as you've seen, they've been adding running backs all season. They've added Aaron Jones and then Kareem Hunt, and then you're later going to see they make a trade for Alvin Kamara, and they've been just trying to fill out their RB room because Pollard and Chubb have just been not productive for them this year, and these are the types of small deals you got to make. So, and I give Berkeleys and the Kong some credit. They recouped some of the capital they sent off in the CD Lamb trade initially, getting a pair of thirds for a 30-year-old journeyman running back. It's pretty good. So obviously, in hindsight, the trade stinks for the forces, but I'll give a B plus to the Kongs, and I give a C plus to the forces of nature. Next trade happened right after DeAndre Hopkins' first game with the Chiefs. Simon Sendit and the Cape Cod Milker, or no, I forget what they are. The Milkers traded away a 2025 early third for DeAndre Hopkins. And I think that's probably about what his market value was. He went on to put up like a 2-touchdown game, an 8-catch, 2-touchdown game right after he made this trade. And it looked like an absolutely brilliant trade. Since then, D-Hop's been a little underwhelming, but between the Chris Olave injury and DK Metcalf injury, it left them with a lot of holes in their wide receiver room to where they needed some plug and play guys besides Jahan Dotson and Quentin Johnston. And Tyreek Hill's been struggling. So adding DeAndre Hopkins gave them another piece that they could use, and they've used them. So I think he's hopeful that he doesn't have to use him the rest of the way. But knowing that you have that reliable veteran attached to Patrick Mahomes for the rest of the season and possibly into next year, I think for a third, that's a swell trade. I give both sides a B on it. Good trade. Not even gonna talk about that. Next trade here is again, forces of nature. PME Warrior acquired Alvin Kamara for their own 2025 first and their own 2025 third, which at this point we've known they're going to be late. And this is to a fellow contender in the what city are they from? I forget the city. They are the Suplex City Milkers. Why couldn't I think of that? I kept saying Music City Milkers in my head. They traded away Alvin Kamara for PME Warriors 25 first and 25 third. I gotta admit, I'm scratching my head at this. I think it's a great value for Kamara in a vacuum. Getting a first and a third in Superflex for Kamara is a smash. At the same time, you're trading Kamara to arguably your biggest contender in the league. That was what I struggled with because they're both contenders, and the Milkers running back room. I mean, they do have Tyrone Tracy. They do have Kyron Williams. They do have James Cook. So they didn't necessarily need Kamara, but it just felt like maybe that was, you know what? I can't really critique it. I'm trying to be creative in how I talk about these trades, but I mean, I give it an A to Simon Sendit, and I give it to the Milkers. And for PME Warrior, I think it was also a trade they needed to make. Someone I can't really critique them either. I'm gonna give them a B plus. I think it's a lot to pay for Kamara, but Simon Sendit and the Milkers have no draft capital, so to recoup some of that, especially after shipping off a third for DeAndre Hopkins, basically meant it was a free Hopkins and a first for Kamara. It's a strong trade for them, and I think it also puts PME Warrior in the forces of nature in a position to get the number 1 overall seed. I can't really critique that too much. So I gave the grades. Next trade I have here, I'm going to skip this one. It's the last trade I have on the list. It's the Sultan, aka me, aka your podcast host, acquired Trey McBride, Jalen Coker, and a 2025 fourth by sending off his own 2025 first, a 2026 second, and Chuba Hubbard. So this was the final piece of the puzzle. I felt like my team was complete. I'm scoring the most points in the league. My only real hole was at tight end. I was playing musical chairs between Tucker Kraft and Zach Ertz. And since I've added Trey McBride, he's put up back-to-back 12 reception weeks, which is not something I can bank on every week, but it certainly makes this trade look even better, especially with Hubbard having a down game. Granted, he's been a top 6 running back all season up until last week. So at the time, it was like I essentially traded away 2 firsts of value ish, 2.5 firsts of value. I would say Chuba was probably worth a first by the time I traded him, if not worth 3 seconds, 2 seconds. So I essentially traded 2 firsts of value for McBride and Coker. Um, and I love Jalen Coker. I think we're gonna look back on this and call it the Jalen Coker deal. The pride of Worcester, graduated from Holy Cross. His per route metrics are through the roof, but most importantly, I overpaid a little bit to get my guy. He was the guy I wanted. I really like Trey McBride. I mean, I guess we are a slight tight end premium, so maybe this is about market value. I'm going to give it an A- for the or a B plus for the Krakens because while I did get the tight end that I wanted, I definitely feel like I overpaid a little bit. I think I should have been able to pay a little less, but again, I've been working on trying to get McBride for 5 weeks, so to finally walk away with this deal, even though it sucks giving up draft capital because the draft is like the most exciting time for me, it does feel like it ended up being a good deal for my team, and it's put me in a position to not only lock up a bye this week, but also potentially make a run at my first title in the league. So yeah, so that's going to be it for today. I'm at 50 minutes. I had a couple other trades that some of my coworkers submitted from their leagues, but I'm I want to sit down and watch the second half of the game. Uh, But yeah, by all means, if you really like this episode, please, like, comment, let me know if you liked it. I'll happily do this again, and I'll take some user submissions from you guys, the viewers, and we can review some more trades, especially in the off season as leagues start reopening. I would love to review what direction people are taking their teams in and what types of trades people are making around the draft, around the NFL draft, around their rookie draft season, around startup season. Granted, I'm not that close to startups as I've only done 3 in my life, really. So yeah, that's it. Catch you guys next time.